Hello, and welcome to our webinar on HR automation, Getting the Transformation Right, in partnership with Sage People. I'm Jenny Roper, editor of HR Magazine. In our last webinar with Sage People on embracing a future of AI and automation, HR's role, we ran a poll on how sophisticated our viewers felt their HR function was in terms of automating processes and introducing new technologies. Slightly alarmingly, we found that 46% of viewers felt that their HR function wasn't sophisticated at all, and that only 2% said they were very sophisticated. And yet, McKinsey estimates that 60% of all occupations have 30% of activities that could be automated, which presents an enticing opportunity for HR when it comes to freeing themselves up to concentrate on strategic value-add activities. So, in this webinar, we're going to discuss which areas specifically HR should be looking to automate, how they can go about doing this, and how far along the road most HR teams are currently. To do that, we have our fabulous panel, who I'll introduce in just a second. But just before I do, I'd like to encourage you, our viewers, to send in your questions using the box at the bottom of your screens. We'll put these questions to our panel in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. So, our panel. First, we have Emma Ayton, People Business Partner at Sage. Emma is an award-winning HR professional with over 20 years' experience and currently oversees the design and execution of talent management and engagement strategies for 1,000 marketing colleagues across 23 countries at Sage. Then we have Kessa Kalin, Director of HR at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who, since assuming the post in 2017, has reorganised the school's entire HR service. Prior to his role, Kessa held HR roles at the Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Service, otherwise known as CAFCAS. And then finally, we have Melanie Steele, an interim HR director whose previous roles include interim HRD at Solus Accident Repair Centres, interim transformation director at Arriva Rail London, interim people change director at Boots Opticians, and HRD at the Cabinet Office, including 10 Downing Street. So that's our panel. So I'd like to kick off our debate by launching a poll question for you, our viewers, to take part in. We'll be running a few more questions throughout the debate, so please do log your thoughts on each. The first question really picks up where we left off with our last webinar with Sage, which was on AI and automation in the workplace more generally, and came onto the HR piece more towards the end. So I wanted to find out how far along the road HR departments are with automation specifically, not just generally with introducing new technologies. So the first question should appear on your screens in just a moment. So here we go. Question 1. How automated are HR processes at your organisation? So we've got very, somewhat, not very, and not at all. So while you, our viewers, log your thoughts on that, I'd like to basically put the same question to you guys. Which is, well, why are we here today? Why is automation so important? And why should HR teams be looking at this to improve their processes and maybe actually concentrate on the more strategic end of things? Emma, I'm going to start with you.
I think it's exactly that. I think we've got a huge responsibility to help see how we as a function can help really deliver a first-class colleague experience. And I think if you look at the colleagues in terms of the experiences that they have outside of work and within their kind of personal lives in terms of retail and different organisations that they interact with, they're taking advantage of this technology. And I think from an HR point of view, it's kind of our time to make sure that we can really reap the rewards of that. And there's so many activities that you can quite easily automate that allow HR professionals the opportunity to concentrate on the really value add stuff that strategically can make a huge difference to an organisation. So if I think, about my role at Sage, there's so many activities now that we've been able to move over to Sage People, which frees up our time to be able to have way more effective conversations with our leaders. We can share way more useful insights into the organisation and how their business areas are performing. So I feel we have an obligation as a function to kind of move with that and at pace.
Yeah. Fantastic. Kessa, did you want to add to that?
I'd just to sort of build on Emma's answer, really. I think that there's age-old arguments around creating efficiencies, streamlining processes, saving money. And I think those arguments are valid. But I think to build on those, I think you want your people to be adding sophisticated input and intelligent input, and not solely focused on administrative input. So if I look at sort of the HR business partners that I work with, I would much rather they are out there with the business, supporting managers to make informed, intelligent decisions, rather than sat behind spreadsheets and trying to collate data for days on end. And sadly, at the moment, I think more of our time, especially in higher education, is spent on sort of 70-80% is spent on admin, and sort of a lot less time is spent on providing that sort of true business partnering. So I think it's more or less building on Emma's answer on that.
Well, that's what I was going to come on to, really. You know, that's the holy grail, isn't it? And it sounds like a real no-brainer hearing you both describe it, but actually, how far along do we think most organisations, and Melanie, I'm going to come to you with this one, because obviously you've had a whole range of experience in a whole kind of breadth of different sectors. Where do you think people are at the moment, just to sort of predict what we might be about to see in our first poll question?
Yeah, Jenny, I think my experience is it's a massive pendulum. So just under 10 years ago, I was in Unilever. They were rolling out global systems. Part of the ethos was about actually being able to capture that data globally to really join Unilever together, to understand what was going on as a global company, and provide that information to managers, individuals, and also to the HR function whilst transforming the service of HR. So that seems like quite a long time ago. And then I've seen everything else, I guess, in between since then. Nothing as sophisticated, and I love hearing, you know, how companies who have been on that journey have continued to invest. I must say, they seem to, once they get on it, they don't get off it, and they see it as continuous improvement and value add, and particularly joining up with business systems. But all the way to the other side, where, you know, there's still the manual record keeping, at best sometimes spreadsheets. You know, booking holidays kind of springs to mind, and it does take me back to kind of go, right, okay, we're still using you know, paper, pens in some instances as well. So yeah, I think we as HR professionals, there's the full suite of where we're going. Of course, for me, the big downside to the organisations who haven't got anything is the lack of getting that data, and spending the time that's freed up to really drill down into it to help with those business decisions and to influence. And it takes so long to do it manually, and spreadsheet creations, which I think, you know, I'm old enough to know that's how I was kind of brought up in it. But I absolutely love pressing a button and being able to do that in a matter of minutes. And we know that technology's got so sophisticated nowadays that actually it's better at doing repetitive tasks than humans. And so there's something in it. I think 10 years ago, jury was still out of how can this replace individuals? Well, I know this better. But actually, we know the evidence is there now that repetitive tasks are much better done.
And do certain sectors, you touched on this when you were talking about your kind of current sector, higher education sector, Kessa, do certain sectors tend to be better at this within HR than others in your experience? And maybe, Emma, you want to jump in on this as well, because you've probably got a bit of an overview potentially.
Yeah, sure. I think tech companies are now realizing the benefit that it can have, and obviously we use our own software as well, which is great, and that's transformed the way that we do things in our organization quite significantly, especially in global organizations when you're dealing across different geographical boundaries and trying to kind of harness a true picture of what your workforce looks like. It is incredibly challenging when you're working in such a complex organisation, and I think it's made a huge difference. So I think within tech we're kind of, you know, finally kind of drinking our own champagne, so to speak, in terms of how we get things done. I don't know, Kezia, whether you can talk a little bit more about the education sector.
I can, and I think I can talk a little bit about public sector generally. I think there's over the years there's almost a cottage industry of whole groups of employees whose jobs are simply to maintain records. So I think they see automation as possibly a threat or a challenge. So it's about shifting that cultural mindset, I think. And just to build on what you said, Melanie, I think it's about creating that time for these people to do sort of more intelligent, sophisticated input rather than that sort of administrative side, which is quite exhausting actually. And by the time you've sort of done a lot of the admin, you don't have much energy or time to sort of focus on the more sophisticated side.
We'll come on to that hopefully, but it's kind of selling the benefits, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Of why you would, as a HR professional, indeed any professional, want to move into the kind of slightly richer, more interesting, much more kind of uniquely human type task. Melanie, do you want to give us a comment on the sector piece specifically before we move on to the poll results?
Definitely. I mean, I think where you've got obviously the tech media have had to kind of move with the times. I'm not necessarily saying that they might be using all the information and what they're doing, but they've definitely got the systems in, the people systems. I think it's also in sectors where there's a big business push for technology. Sure. So why would you not do it in HR as well as it's not seen as doing it to HR? It's a business need, and definitely financial services, insurance. They've obviously been at the technology journey for a long time, and most of them have systems in. Again, I think they're on the journey, but they do. And then through to kind of more the manufacturing, the more with a huge workforce, retail, etc. They're probably, you know, apart from some of the big ones you can pick out, on a whole, I think they're probably a little bit catching up at the moment to make it happen.
Let's see then what our viewers, so this obviously is just a snapshot, but let's see if it kind of chimes with what we're saying. So we've got the results here, hopefully appearing on your screens where you're watching remotely as well. So a very small percentage in the very, and then somewhat and not at all. So most people sat in the 50% pretty much sat in the not very camp. Emma, is that what you expected to see?
I think so, and I guess just, you know, building on the points that we've already talked about, I think there's a lot of types of organisations. Let's look at retail, for example, where they have great people systems but don't leverage it as much as they should. So they've got, you know, they can clock people in, they can clock people out, they can report an absence. But actually, I think where a lot of big organisations and smaller organisations in that fact are trying to get to is where we can have much more visibility into what does this insight tell us now and what's it going to tell us in 12 months, 24 months, 5 years' time. And I think some of the bit that I'm most excited about developing our capability to be able to do the best that we can possibly do with this insight is to help predict what the organisation could look like and help HR business partners understand if there's likely to be some areas of risk in their organisation that they may not even anticipate is a problem right now. So we've got some great people analytics guys within our team at Sage who we work quite closely with, who are phenomenal at being able to help feed us information and to help us understand what the journey is around where we're going to take analytics. And I think that's a bit that makes me most excited, because if I can sit down with one of our execs and anticipate that we're likely to have this issue but it could be in 12 months, but what can we do to plan for it now? It's so much more powerful. And I think as a function, it just gives us way more credibility, because those are the types of conversations that you can have with leaders that will make a massive difference. You know, the dashboards that we can create to go through in kind of around transactional data. You know, I guess one of and we chatted a little bit about this just before the session started, and I think you've got to make sure that people are taking it seriously, and the information that the HR systems put out is only as good as the stuff that we get in. So I think there's always that kind of watch out for me around making sure that we've got the right level of capability within our managers and colleagues to make sure they understand the importance of maintaining the software and the information that's in there as well.
Yeah, I was at a talk yesterday actually where a HR director was talking about they thought they had 60,000 employees when she arrived, and actually it turned out they had around 52,000. So, you know, which you can understand, can't you? In a global organisation, you feasibly wouldn't know, but it kind of blew my mind a little bit. But having that data in order,
mine's less around the predictive, because I think it's quite hard. We know the world of work is changing at such a pace at the moment that you know, the predictive is quite hard to do. But I think to be able to scenario plan, so you know, this could happen. So this could mean X, this could happen, which means Y. And being able to cement that into business information, i.e. kind of moving away from this silo kind of position of that's HR, that's commercial, that's customer data, is I think where you get very powerful. And then it tips into the value add, because you become round that table a business leader first and foremost, quite rightly so, where you're adding value of the total piece of it. So being able to do those scenarios and being able to do it, I think will be really, really helpful in a future which is becoming less and less predictable.
It's that solid evidence space, isn't it? And that having that sort of that management information that gives you that evidence rather than acting on a hunch or anecdotal pieces of feedback. Having that sort of business case and that evidence, you can really make informed decisions, and it builds on the credibility of the service as well, that you've got something to sort of add weight to what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, we talk in HR obviously a lot about adding credibility, and we talk a lot about evidence base. So actually, data hopefully should give you those two things. I'm going to launch our second poll question just to ensure we keep nicely to time today. So this is really looking, and I'll put this to you guys while people log their votes as well, but this is really looking at, well, where have people added some level of automation into their HR systems? So here we go, on your screens now. Which areas of HR have you introduced some level of automation currently? Tick all that apply. So we've got a big long list here: recruitment, onboarding, benefits, absence management, L&D, performance management, engagement surveys, communications, analytics, payroll, succession and career planning, or other. So I'll leave you a long list to kind of wade through and tick all that apply. So we'll have a chat amongst ourselves while you guys watching remotely do that. So I want to put that to you guys really in a kind of predicting where you think, or from moving through different organisations, where you think most people have added that layer of automation, if indeed they have done so. Melanie, I'm going to come to you as our kind of sector agnostic.
I think the self-serve kind of what I call is just data warehousing, because it doesn't really do a lot with just kind of collating data, but it's a first step. Without collating the data, you can't go on to do some of the more sophisticated stuff that we were just talking about. Interestingly, which has been a little disappointing, not turning on the the individual self-serve. So it's for the HR function and for the managers, but not the individuals. And I've got to say, you know, when I hear that, I do kind of go, have we not missed the point a little bit in it? But this is all about how you engage people. And I think there is a missed trick sometimes in organisations I've observed. Instead of individuals driving what's needed, it becomes very polarised into HR and almost doing the same as what HR do today, but using a system. So I would call that equivalent of just like having a spreadsheet really about it. And some of that is not understanding the capability of what it brings. And some of that I think is not working closely enough with CTOs, IT, of really understanding the power of what tools can do now. So yeah, definitely seen in recruitment a lot more sophistication, which has been quite exciting to see. You know, thinking about culture fit, mindset, there's a whole host of people's views on that, but I think it's good that definitely thinking about that customer experience. And probably some of the stuff I've seen recently, which I've been quite interested in, is the well-being side of things. Okay. Anything with an app. I quite like an app where it's very easy to use, intuitive, and is actually something for individuals as opposed to, you know, something that HR have dreamt up that they think individuals need.
But they're just kind of sending forth without, seeing whether that's something anyone actually wanted to use. Kessa, in your experience of your past couple of organisations.
I can give Kafkas as a great example. Actually, we had a really interesting journey with technology. So when I arrived there, there wasn't much in the way of HR technology, and I would often meet managers and I would have a list of things to go through, and they'd have their 10 key items, and you'd almost second guess what was on the list. And then slowly but surely we sort of started to develop really good sort of intelligent people related sort of data management information, and we had a platform to do that. And where we got to at the end of that journey, and it was a slow process, but we got there. We were able to look at individual, team, service area, and national level things like workload, things like appraisal rates, absence, training, and a lot more. And then I was able to sort of approach managers with sort of a suite of information and then actually say, let's look at what the data is telling us and let's help that inform our discussion. The managers had access to that as well. And then you're talking about the individuals had access to their own data. So we went from an organisation that was very sort of anecdotal, operated on a bit of a hunch, and sort of thinking we knew what we were doing, to actually knowing exactly what we were doing. And we were able to prioritise a lot more, focus our efforts in a more sophisticated way. So I covered sort of 3 or 4 service areas. I was able to tell at a very quick glance which area had the most absence, and I need to do a bit more well-being in that area. Which area had least sort of training rate, so I need to focus more on training. And I was able to use my sort of other HR functions and colleagues in a much more nuanced and much more intelligent way, whereas previously I would apply sort of the same broad brush approach across the piece. Whereas now I was really able to tailor the services. But that was a absolutely, that was a 3 or 4 year journey. We had a really great sort of MI and HR systems team who were able to develop those technologies. But we also had the leadership and the business partners who were able to ask what we needed, and it was a good sort of marriage, I would say. But we operated in a much more informed way, and that was sector leading, and that allowed the organisation to really transform. We went from sort of an inadequate service in 2010 from Ofsted rating to sort of an outstanding service sort of 7 or 8 years later.
It's a great case study.
It's a brilliant case study.
To draw inspiration from.
Absolutely, and I think your magazine have covered, HR magazine have covered that numerous times. So that was a really great story, and I was part of that journey. So that's a good example. Sort of a bad example, I'd say, is where I'm currently working. When I first joined, on my first day, I was given an annual leave hard copy card, and I made it my mission to change that. And it took
nothing else.
Absolutely, and it took about 18 months. Now we've got annual leave on an online system. It sounds like a massive achievement. It really isn't, but that's I think that's complete sort of pendulum. I think it's the complete spectrum. So and Kafkas we started many years ago, but it takes, I'd say, an organisation buy-in and an investment and having the right people and having the right vision.
Which we'll come to actually in our next poll question around barriers, because I think senior buy-in and sort of those skills to be able to persuade people, your CEO and your CTO to invest in, I think is really crucial. Let's go to the results then. Emma, I'm going to come to you to sort of give us some opinions or carry on the conversation around where we think people are at. So actually it's really even mix. I think recruitment, which actually kind of chimes with what you were saying, doesn't it, Mel, around some encouraging work going on in recruitment, is coming just about top. And then performance management also up there, I think, if I'm reading that correctly. Emma, where are you seeing most people actually being further along the journey in HR automation?
Firstly, don't underestimate the importance of that first step as well. So we talked about the holiday card, didn't we, a few minutes ago before we started. And, I think actually having the courage and the conviction to take that first step on the journey is incredibly important. I'm not surprised by the poll data. I think the piece that I would like to unpick a little bit more is around onboarding, because I feel in my experience, regardless of the industry or the organisation that I've been in, onboarding for me has always been an area where I think we could do a lot more in helping to create a great colleague experience. I think, again, performance management, I think that's an area where, thinking about the transition. When I first joined Sage 4.5 years ago, we had so many disparate HR systems across our organisation. We had countries using spreadsheets, and our ability to be able to understand about the demographics of our workforce was incredibly difficult. And I think sometimes it's really difficult now to kind of step back and think, that was only 4.5 years ago. We've achieved a lot in that time. But I think for me, probably the big pieces are recruitment, I think, are more around performance management. But I definitely see a big piece now shifting in compensation and benefits as well. And I think giving colleagues that kind of access to that level of information about not only from a well-being perspective, but their helping them understand their financial situation is incredibly impactful as well.
Fantastic. I wondered actually, before we move on to launching our third and final poll question, I wondered if there were any kind of almost low-hanging fruits that you guys could recommend, or these are great places to start. If someone sat there thinking, well, this all sounds great, and I would like to add that value in all of those areas you've talked about, are there some quite easy wins for people? If we're talking about all these different areas and where people should start? Mel, you're kind of nodding thoughtfully.
Well, I would say, where is the business dictating it? I think I have a bit of a thing where it starts from an HR perspective. I mean, there are things, I'm sure, but I think if you, I'm sure we'll talk about this, about how do you build that business case. But I think, not to preempt that, but to kind of start off, you know, what is the business struggling to do at the moment where automation could play a really good role in helping them, whether that's at a managerial level. If it's individual, that's even better, which tends to be more in the employee engagement type side, or performance management, anything where it has a cycle kind of perspective, which doesn't get over engineered, but a bit of tech really could make people's experience different. And I think about surveys, you know, well, what do people want to do? And the ability now to, you know, everyone's used Survey Monkeys, that's really unsophisticated in many ways, but the easy of just being able to send something like that out and get an opinion very quickly on something, and being able to aggregate the data. So, yeah, I would, low-hanging fruit, I'm not sure that there's necessarily that, but I would say the quick wins probably would be the stuff that the business is complaining the most about, and that then leads you into the space where you're already building your business case in, and it can only benefit HR from that perspective too. So whichever area you're going after, it's always going to be better with the professionals, like being able to automate it as well. But you kill two birds with one stone. You get the buy-in, you hopefully get some of the business wanting to do it, and then you make the job easier for yourself and the team.
That actually segues perfectly onto
and
our last poll question.
I didn't even know, Jenny.
And I didn't even pay you. So we're going to launch our third poll question to make sure we don't run out of time today. So for this, I'd like you, you viewers at home, to log some of the obstacles your HR team is encountering at the moment to adding a greater degree of automation. So maybe it is making the business case, maybe it's getting the buy-in, as we've already touched on a couple of times. So question 3 should be appearing on your screens. What are the obstacles to adding a greater degree of automation to your HR functions, processes currently? And again, tick all that apply. Lack of investment for systems, don't know where to start, so we've covered that a little bit just then. Lack of technical understanding among the HR team, concerns around compromising the quality of processes, ethical and security concerns around automating the processing of personal data, and then finally concerns around team members losing their jobs. And actually, I wondered if we could talk a little bit while people log their opinions on that very last obstacle. And we touched on this earlier as well, didn't we, around the idea that you've really got to kind of win hearts and minds in the HR team and persuade them why life will be better if you're automating something they did manually before. So how do you reassure team members? Guess it sounded like you maybe had done a little bit of this in the past.
Okay,
if they're thinking, oh my God, I'm literally going to be replaced by
I think
a
it's
robot.
about building the business case that sort of automation and sort of enhancements in technology are there to augment and supplement people's daily work and not replace it, and that they can use. You can use them in a more sophisticated and intelligent way, that they can add sort of input that isn't just administration. So I've had that challenge in particular. And then I also think it's about having the right people in HR as well. If you've got people who are absolutely resistant to change, regardless of automation, you should be questioning whether you've got them, or they're the right people in the first place. Because change, as Melanie said numerous times, it happens, and it's happening quicker, and it's more unpredictable. So you need people who are change ready, regardless of automation. It has been a challenge, but I think for me, it always starts with the people. And if you've got the right people, and you can sort of coach and develop them in the right way and make them understand why technology and automation is important, and how it supports their work and not to replace it. I think that's the key.
I guess the barrier there for sort of, some people would say, well, the problem is we don't have necessarily the right people sitting in the more transactional side of HR, because actually they were very good at doing operational transactional type stuff, which you're all now saying maybe, you know, we don't need you so much for, and we would like you to move on to this slightly more strategic side.
I think a good example is probably the legal sector. I was reading a couple of days ago that there's some technology that legal firms are now using that can scan legal documents, sort of 2,500 legal documents a day, whereas previously a junior solicitor would probably scan half a dozen a day. So, but that doesn't mean junior junior lawyers are no longer needed. They're just deployed in a much more sort of resourceful way, and they're not sort of scanning documents all day because they've got technology to do that, and they're probably out there supporting clients and making better use of their skills and their experience. And I think that's where HR probably needs to move to, that we're out there supporting the business and we're not sort of grappling with spreadsheets and outdated systems.
Yeah. Emma, would you agree? What do you say to that person who says, I'm being made redundant? What's going to happen?
I completely agree. And I think, in my experience, bringing those colleagues with us on the journey and helping them be part of the solution can be really powerful. So actually, if they can get involved in, how is this software set up? What role is it going to play in the organisation? What should it look like? What should the workflows look like? And kind of try as much as we can to play on their strengths and around systems and processes. And then I guess help them to see what role that they can have in the outputs of the system, rather than the kind of stuff that goes in the front. And exactly what you've said, I think, around making sure now this is an opportunity for those colleagues to interact more with other colleagues in the business. And I think that for me is a huge watch out, that we don't completely replace that kind of face of HR from a people services perspective with a system. I think we still have to make sure that those colleagues are accessible and people understand how they can have a conversation with a human being rather than just a robot as well.
And a chatbot.
Absolutely.
Anything behind it. Melanie, slightly provocative question. Is it about actually picking up on Kessa's point? If we don't have the right people, do we need to be quite honest about them no longer being the right people? And there's probably another sort of slightly more transactional job that they could be doing elsewhere in another.
I mean, I'd say yes, because isn't that what we would be telling,
the
leaders? Yeah. So I think there's definitely a moment where we need to role model. We know the world of work is changing, across all business areas. So actually, we need to get on the front foot and be able to demonstrate that. I'm really optimistic. I think that's how I go into it. That why would you not want this to happen? And I think that education piece, as we talked about, and getting them involved from day one is absolutely key. What I tend to see is people self-selecting out sometimes. They're saying, do you know what, this isn't me. And maybe in the business there could be something else they could do, or maybe a different business. Because when we're talking about the pendulum, there's other businesses that aren't moving at the same rate and the same pace. Now, at some point, it will come. Yeah. But for some people who are saying, look, I just want 5 more years, Mel, I want to get my pension at that point, and I just want to do a really good job I enjoy, and I want to do X. So I think that is no different, I think, to how we'd want to the business leaders to treat their people. So and I think obviously emotions can run high sometimes, and this can be scary. We were just talking before we came on air about how technology is changing at a right old pace, and us kind of just speaking between ourselves, wasn't it? Have you done this? Have you done that? So I think, no matter what generation you're in, and the good thing is there are new generations coming through that actually do this as, it's part of their DNA now, as I would call it, so they can help others. It's really nice where you see it. When I was in the automotive business, it was fantastic seeing the apprentices helping the more, really highly skilled workforce, reverse mentoring. Yeah. And it was absolutely fantastic to see. And actually, it's very hard to create that. If you told people to go and do it, it just wouldn't work. Yeah. But actually, them taking the initiative to do that, I mean, we call it reverse mentoring and the kind of thing, but they didn't know what they were doing. It was just good business ethics, right? Yeah. So I'm optimistic. I think we need to speed it up a bit, and I think the business needs us to do that.
And do we need to upskill? You touched on there, and again, brilliantly. I was going to come on to that. Do we need to upskill our HR teams in the sort of technical sides? Because actually, that's a bit of a question mark, isn't it? And we struggle with this with all new technologies in a way, don't we? We think we've got to be an expert at coding, and then we suddenly realise, no, the whole point is that the website does this for me. If anything, I don't need to be an expert at coding. How technically proficient and skilled do HR people need to be now, Emma? Is that the HR director's responsibility to make sure that they're getting these new kind of quite whizzy technological skills?
Yeah, I think that it is, but I think it's going back to some of the things that we've already talked about. I think you're going to get some colleagues who are going to embrace it, and in which case we should help support those colleagues to learn a host of new skills and understand how they can apply them in the organisation. You'll get some people who may be a bit more tentative around their kind of capabilities to want to learn new things, and I think again, just picking back up on your point around, actually, we've got to practice what we preach here as HR professionals, and I think tying it into colleagues' personal development plans is super important. But I think inevitably you're going to get colleagues along the way who may try as hard as they possibly can, but actually are going to find the transition really difficult. And then I think, that's where we've got to, kind of step up and potentially have some difficult conversations with, with colleagues in our own functions potentially. Absolutely. To, give them honest feedback.
Yeah, modelling what we would do in the rest of the business. Let's go to the results, because we need to see whether what we've just been discussing is kind of representative, whether that is a bit of a barrier for people or not. So lack of investment is coming top by quite a way there, which is interesting, and we'll definitely talk on that. I think lack of technical understanding, just touched on that, so that's really interesting. Don't know where to start, interesting. And then ethical and security concerns. So let's come on to really making the business case then, really persuading those with the budgets or those who are going to release the budgets for HR to invest in all this technology. How do you do that? How have you done that, Kessa, when you've managed that in the past?
To convince a sort of CFO or a COO or a CEO, I think they always look at numbers. So to make that financial business case is important, that how streamlining a process will save X on the bottom line. I think that's a powerful narrative. But to sort of supplement that, I think the cultural journey is quite important as well. So I think to touch on both of your points, that people now come to work and expect a certain level of automation and technology, and by not having that in place, you'll struggle to attract and then retain your key people. Whereas if your competitors are doing that, they'd be much more likely to sort of attract those people in the first place. So I think building the financial case, and then also supplementing that with the cultural piece and marrying the two, I think that's how you should really do it.
That's how you do it. I want to move on to the ethical and security concerns, because obviously that was coming up as quite a big barrier for people as well. Melanie, I know you've got some kind of interesting thoughts on this and how we make sure we are really ensuring that all these systems do what they're meant to do, and how we reassure actually the rest of the business that is the case.
I mean, I think in HR it's always difficult. We have to balance. So there's the digital and the business focus stuff, but we also a bit of custodians of the ethical side of things as well. We look at things from a wider lens. That's why you have an HR profession, so we can look at people in the round. But we've been through a bit of this before, right? So we used to do everything with paper. We used to have filing systems. We used to have to make sure that, personal data was kept under lock and key. We heard, terrible stories about how people would have documents on trains and someone sat next to them would be able to do it. Not saying anything from my past kind of role, where obviously data security was of the highest accord. But we went through that. So I think, what did we learn back then? It's having a framework, some basic principles. I do think it's about educating people. I am kind of a bit scared about sometimes how I hear people talking about data online versus, if it was physical paper, they just wouldn't treat it in the same way, or passing passwords around and stuff like that. I think educationally people have become much more better and aware of this as their own personal banking data, how they shop, integrating it with what's going on in the outside world, I think really helps people to do that. But I do think we need to get ahead of the game. Legislation is really lagging, but it usually does. And I think, HR shouldn't be scared to kind of step in and put those frameworks around. I don't mean policing within an inch of its life.
Yeah.
But, there's tech people, they understand this.
Yeah.
So they understand it about what it can and can't do. And I think sitting down and kind of having that conversation about, okay, let's just work through this from an end-to-end perspective.
Yeah. So
what are we doing with that data? Where does it sit? Who has access to it? It amazed me. One of the first things I do when I go into an organisation, if they've got a system, is work out the permissions. So who has access? And 9 times out of 10, many companies still have people that can access that data who have moved on, left, or all sorts of things. Yeah. Now, if you said, a file, a paper file, how many people, it'd be locked in that cabinet and the HR director wouldn't let anyone go for it apart from the person that needs it.
Yeah.
So again, I think we just need to get a little bit better and educate of how what's a checklist?
Yeah.
How would you deal with it? And I think, again, I'm hugely optimistic with this, because I think what people are doing in their personal life and being more mindful of fraud and that kind of thing helps them. We need them to bring that same logic into the workplace.
Interesting. We must go to some questions so we don't run out of time. So yeah, hold that thought. We're going to go to some viewer questions if we've got some. So here we go. First question from you guys watching remotely. Isn't there a danger of having too much automation and killing the art of conversation? So actually this comes back to what we were saying around freeing people up to get out and about in the business, which I know, Emma, you were speaking on.
Yeah, I feel really passionately about this because I think the answer to that question in my mind is, well, yes, of course there is. And I think when we're supporting an organisation through planning for automation, we need to factor that into the discussions that we're having and make sure that we encourage and enable time for colleagues to have conversations, with others. I think that's really important, because there are still some problems that are way more complex, and there's way more context that automation just isn't going to get, no matter how hard we try. So I think, for me, that's absolutely key, and that will make or break an organisation being able to do this and to do it well.
Fantastic.
There's still the H.
Yes, exactly.
in human.
Don't take the human out of HR.
There's been lots of kind of different things, but I think you can have digital, you have automation, you have data. That's a really great part. You have the science and the behavioural type of stuff, and then you have the human. Without that, otherwise it's not HR, because you could just tuck it underneath another function. That's what brings us. It's just helping us create time and bandwidth and getting more accuracy. It's the basics it's helping us with.
I mean, I'll flip that question on its head. I think the more automation creates more room and more time, absolutely. So I think that's probably the way to frame that.
I mean, that's the key opportunity here, isn't it? Running through everything we've said, this big opportunity to be more human. Let's move on to another question. What can HR education do to improve the skills of graduates in order to prepare them for less admin roles and more decision-making roles? So yeah, actually, if we're saying the future of business is more human, then why are we teaching them just technical skills, whether it's HR or anything else? We actually need to be teaching them many more soft skills. I think it's the soft skills that we keep hearing about. So I think technical skills, you can more or less teach that to anybody. It's developing people, sort of their softer side, their emotional intelligence, their social intelligence, and that's a completely different set of skills than a technical set of skills. How do we teach that?
And I think that's a lot about mentoring. And I think that's a lot about developing the full human and not just focusing on, right, this is what the CIPD says, this is what the employment law is, and just study from a book. So that's a probably broader challenge for our education system as well. It's not just of HR
professionals. It's a huge challenge, isn't it? Is it about more experiential learning, maybe more kind of, I don't know, on the job, or kind of having a go at?
I think it's not about dismissing. I think it's kind of hard to talk about technical and soft. I think the world is merging a lot more. So when I see on Instagram and see some of the creative stuff that goes on there, there's technical skills, but there's also, they've had to think about how are they connecting with people. Yes, they're doing it through one medium, which, is the technology or online, but equally someone's had to think about that, be creative. So I kind of don't separate as much. I think we have to be careful as the world's moving on, that just because it's done from a technical perspective, it doesn't mean that they might have, there's so much collaboration that goes in nowadays to people doing stuff via digital, but what's gone on behind that, first of all, is social. I also see through the education entrepreneurial skills, people looking, there's something that's missing, I want to fill that gap. Well, to be a great entrepreneur, you've got to be able to do a whole myriad of skills. It isn't just technical skills. So I just think we need to be careful that we don't kind of generalise too much, because things are blending a lot more nowadays.
Out with the bathwater, where we're suddenly saying, oh no, you don't need to have any actual knowledge, or the robots have got, you still need to know things, still need to learn.
The robots are coming.
Yes, exactly. They've arrived. Let's do one last question, or one or two last questions if we've got just enough time. What are the key questions HR should be asking suppliers when looking for new HR tech that could help to take us on this automation journey, Emma? What do you reckon? What should
That's a
people be
great
saying?
question.
What should people be asking
Really
Sage when
good.
they come to?
It's a good question. I think having a really robust procurement process is incredibly important. And I also, my recommendation would be to see, as many software providers, as you can, to make an assessment about what's going to be the right fit for your organisation. You will find that different types of software companies often specify and have a lot of products that are relevant to a particular vertical. We were just talking a little bit earlier about the education sector, and we talked a bit about manufacturing and retail. I think it's important to take recommendations. So I think talk to people who've had great experiences of working with them, with tech, and then don't be afraid to ask questions about the capability both now but also in the future. Because for me, making those decisions, it's the start of your journey, and I think you've got to be really practical around this is what we'd like to achieve with the software in the next 12 months, but actually, where do we want that to take us in the next 24 months, 36 months, and in the future? Exactly. And another thing that's, I think, incredibly critical now is people expect access to this stuff on their phones. So make sure that it's in the cloud. I think that's really, really important.
So ask that
really
question.
important. Yes.
Let's do one more question because they're still coming in. So I'm keen to give you guys a chance to put your questions to the panel. So last question: how would you recommend HR strike a balance between taking advantage of automation opportunities and also retaining human judgment and decision making? So kind of similar ground, but give us some wrapping up comments then, because obviously this is kind of what we've been talking about throughout, isn't it, Melanie or Kassar?
Yeah, I think I would strive for continuous improvement. Once you've got automation, that's the start of the journey. It's not the end. And I get it can be quite scary if you've never experienced it. But look, there are many HR professionals that have felt like that at the beginning. Back to using technology in its great senses. Go on social media and see who is within your network that's done this. Ask them these questions, and I'm sure they felt the same at the beginning about it. I think some of the people that have been the most negative about this journey, and I think back to the public sector where it took a lot, it was a big step change of underinvestment for a lot of years, and then suddenly going all guns blazing, putting systems in place. There was a lot of people who were just, this will never work. And actually seeing them converted to, well, when are we going to get something for this? And how can it do that?
Yeah.
That's when you're kind of winning. So I'd say to anyone, you're right to be, cautious. Anything that's changed, it isn't natural for most people. It isn't, woohoo, this is exciting change. It's fear,
It's meant to feel
a little bit.
tricky.
But I would also say the kind of decision making you'll be able to do in the future is so much more value add. And it's probably the type of things that you've known that have been going on, but you may have not got your voice heard.
Yeah. So again,
So
using
using
this,
it gives you a great platform,
Fantastic.
I think, to go after the things that maybe for years you've been banging the drum on to senior execs and never quite got them to convert them to understand it.
Yeah. Guys, any other wrapping up comments you want to throw in there on this kind of last?
Just sort of final comments. I think as sort of business leaders and HR leaders, we have to sell it as an opportunity, and without sounding cliched, it is an opportunity, not a threat.
Yeah.
And then it adds to our armoury and doesn't take away from it, I think.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And I think you just said something really powerful, Melanie, around the importance of networking.
Yeah.
There's a huge population of great and talented HR professionals, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of us all when I say we'd all be more than happy to share our insights and experiences with other people if they wanted to link in. So
fantastic.
Thank you.
What a great note to end on. Well, that's all we've got time for today. We could go on and on as always. As always, look out for coverage of the debates explored today at hrmagazine.co.uk and in an upcoming issue of the magazine. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Sage People, our sponsor, and a huge thank you to our panel. Thank you very much.